This might be my first Pepe Sylvia video on this channel, and for that, I apologize. Hey book besties, my name is Angie, and this is my channel, Maybe I'll Read Today, where we talk about books that I may or may not have read. Today we're going to be talking about a book that I have read, a book that I had no intention of making a video for, or a review or anything like that. A book that I thought was going to be a whatever read. I was going to read it, be like, wow, that was weird, and then I was going to move on with my life, but unfortunately that's not the case because here we are. And that book is Tender as the Flesh by Agustina Basterica. This is a dystopian horror book that follows our main character, Marcos, who is the head of like a processing plant in Argentina. He is processing in his warehouse, in his factory, human flesh. And we're gonna get into why in like literally 2 seconds. So hold your horses. Basically, we follow Marcos as he is navigating through his life after the loss of his son and his wife, who is still alive but also left him. So just like mourning the ends of relationships in different aspects, but also him navigating this new society, this new world that he's living in, which is titled by the government as the transition, which is the legalization of cannibalism, the production and consumption of human flesh. Basically, why that happens in this society is because there was a worldwide virus that made all animal meat poisonous to humans. So we follow Marcos as he's dealing with all of this, as he's like trying to compartmentalize his job as it has changed. And then one day he receives a gift of a first generation pure, which is essentially a person who was born to be bred, to be produced. And that kind of throws a wrench in his whole compartmentalizing situation that he's in. I really enjoyed this book. I know there's a lot of mixed reviews because it's graphic, it's horrifying, there's a lot in it. But that's why we're going to talk about it today, because I feel like there's a lot to be dissected. No processing pun intended. I don't know if that's a thing that they do in processing plants. I broke up my notes in like different themes, so that's just how we're gonna do this, and hopefully it makes sense, and if not, I'm sorry. This book, for only being like 180 pages, this book is a lot, so I'm trying my best here. I will say, before we get into the themes, the style of this book is very much like The Handmaid's Tale, in the way that there isn't really that much plot, and it's not really that much of like a character analysis. It's more of like a setting world analysis. The biggest difference is that in The Handmaid's Tale, the narrator is very vague and you kind of have to like piece things together. Whereas in this book, things are very detailed, things are very explicit. Like I said, I wasn't planning on doing a review or doing a video about this book at all, but literally 15 pages in, I annotated every single page. So I was like, I guess I have some things to say. But it was super visceral. Again, do not recommend it if you're like super queasy or anything like that. But while it was super visceral, and while it is an extreme take on society and capitalism, I will say the most unsettling thing to me, like cannibalism aside, the thing that was the most unsettling to me is the parallels between this world and the world that we live in, especially in this like ongoing pandemic. And that's extremely disturbing because this book wasn't even published in like 2020, when like you could be like, oh, that's how they got their idea. It was published in 2017, so 3 years prior. And somehow Agustina called it, and I hate her for it. Let me stop jumping around all over the place. Let's just get into it, right? So the reason why I rated it 4 stars is because as I've been like dropping little seeds throughout this long-winded intro, on the surface level of this horror story, it's a story about cannibalism, but the underbelly of the story is really about the importance of language in a society, and the role that capitalism and the need to survive in a society plays into normalizing atrocious acts and in desensitizing societies. Because there's a lot of behind the scenes things that Marcos touches on that kind of like allows for this society to happen, and not only happen, but to like kind of thrive. So let's just start at the beginning with the importance of language, word choice, and voice. So from the start, Marcos makes the distinction between what he refers to as first and last name humans and the ones who are bred for consumption, who are referred to in the book as heads, which really sucks, but that's the language that we're also going to be using in this video just to keep things consistent and less wordy. But so yeah, there's human people, there's first and last name people, and then there are heads, who are the people who are bred for consumption. This isn't a distinction that Marcos does on his own to like help him cope. This was actually mandated by the government. The government chose this language, the government mandates this language, it enforces it. If you are caught referring to the heads as humans or anything besides special meat, you can be arrested, silenced, disappeared. And I also think the choice of the author using the word disappeared is very deliberate, given the history of like that part of Latin America and people being disappeared during dictatorships. If you don't know about that, feel free to Google. I think you can just Google the disappeared and you can learn a lot about it. I think it's mostly Chilean, but I think it also happened in Argentina. That's a side tangent, but also related because this is an Argentinian book. So you could be punished moderately or severely if you're caught using the wrong language. And that is, again, mandated by the government in the story to make the transition as fluid, as simple, as easy as possible. And even titling this new world as the transition is also really deliberate. The author describes the title, The Transition, as one word to sum up and classify the unfathomable, an empty word. Change, transformation, shift, synonyms that appear to mean the same thing, though the choice of one over the other speaks to a distinct view of the world. And I thought that was really neat of the author to make this very, very, very deliberate explanation. I also think it's kind of funny because the author is just like, even if you don't get it, I'm gonna hand feed you this explanation and this theme to you. I thought it was really interesting because transition has a connotation of a gradual but permanent change, as opposed to words like transformation that has something like a fantastical feeling to it, or words like change or shift that kind of connotates like the ability to move back and forth, which obviously isn't the case for this world because the government really wants to make the transition stick and make people start consuming human flesh for a lot of reasons, which again, we're gonna get into in a little bit. Hold your horses. But yeah, I think it's really interesting that not only that the author chooses these words so deliberately, but the fact that she like explains it so explicitly so that you don't miss the point, I think is really interesting, because even then I've seen some reviews where people have missed the point, which is kind of disappointing, but whatever. So throughout the story, we meet a lot of different characters, one of them being Marcos's boss, Senor Urami, who is the owner of the processing plant that he works at, and specifically of like the tannery. He makes the leather goods using the human flesh. Very gross, we know. Also, another side note, we're not going to get into the whole cannibalism horror of it all. We know cannibalism is horrific. That's not the point. The point is what I'm talking about now. The cannibalism is just the shock factor. Everything else is the layers, the onion, the Shrek, if you will. But anyways, so Marcos says that his boss every morning goes through the same monologue. Marcos deliberately uses the word recites. He recites the same monologue about how important his job is, how important we are. I use the term we as in like, in his perspective, in his point of view, how important we as the warehouse, the processing plant, are to the larger society, to the economy, the quality of the products they make, the steps that they need to take to create these products, the quality of the chemicals, etc., etc., etc. The use of the word recites is also very interesting to me because I'm no linguist, but I read occasionally. But the use of the word recites is also really interesting to me because it's just like repeating the same thing over and over again, in the hopes that saying it enough times makes it true. Him saying the same thing every morning is just him trying to convince himself that his job is important. This industry is important. This is worth it. You know, it's okay and it's worth it. And at the end of the day, he shouldn't feel horrible about using human flesh because it's worth it, which I think is so insanely sad in a lot of ways. Sad and equal parts disturbing, because, you know, if you just say the same thing over and over again, you're going to convince yourself. However, Marcos describes his boss's words as constructing a small, controlled world that's full of cracks. And that's not just to say his boss's delusion is full of cracks, but the overall overarching delusion of this world, this society, is full of cracks. Because as soon as you start using the different language that's been banned, then like people have to confront the fact that they are eating human flesh. But again, it's all about that deliberate word choice, building up this new world, building up these new ideas, and convincing everyone that it's true, that it's okay, that it's fine. Cannibalism aside, that's very scary to me, because the power of language is very influential, is very powerful. I feel like you can look at a lot of different like horrific events in history, and a lot of it starts with very deliberate, very specific language and word choice. And I think Augustina does a really great job in like depicting that here, because the entire book is that. On a more literal perspective or literal level, like the heads have their vocal cords removed so that they can't scream, so that they can't protest. So, you know, like on a literal level, the power of language, the power of voice is equally as important, because if you can't scream, you can't protest, you are just subjected to the horrors that this society is doing onto you, which is also very hard to read. So again, like, I cannot emphasize enough that if you are squeamish, if this is going to get you, don't read it. Augustina does not hold back in the depictions of like how the heads are treated. It sucks. But, and I guess on that note, we can talk about my second point, which is about marginalized people in this society, because they didn't start with just producing heads, right? It had to start from somewhere. And Marcos explains how when animal meat became poisonous in many countries, immigrants started to disappear, poor people started to disappear, and at first it was alarming, but it was quickly forgotten about, because in society these people are deemed expendable. You know, in a lot of ways it's similar to our real life society, because if the ruling society deems you as expendable, like they're not going to put in the effort to find you if you're suddenly disappeared, if you're suddenly eaten in this case, disappeared or killed in real life cases. And you can just like look at the like police response to like missing Indigenous women as an example of a real life situation where that happens. You know, Indigenous women are seen as expendable. When they go missing, there's not really a huge effort to find them. The same could be said about trans women. So it's this constant mirroring between this book and real life society that's like the most disturbing part to me. And on top of that disturbance is the fact that in this book, as these poor people, as these undocumented immigrant people are being eaten and going missing, media kind of spins that in a way that makes it almost positive, because they're just like, oh yeah, like poverty is disappearing, and it's like, obviously poverty is disappearing. You guys are eating them. So, and then obviously once that resource is depleted and eaten, that's when they turn to like processing heads in the factory and like a whole thing. There's also a group of people that Marcos refers to as scavengers. And basically these people are people who can't afford to buy the meat at like a butcher's place or at a qualified, federally approved, FDA approved place. And so instead they kind of just hang around the processing plant and wait until like the processing plant like throws scraps, and so they like take the scraps, take the injured products, the broken products, the diseased products, and live off of that, which is again equal parts disturbing and very sad. There's one scene towards the end of the book. I'm gonna try and keep this as spoiler free as possible, but you know, I'm trying. There's one scene towards the end of the book where the scavengers near his processing plant overturn a truck and start like ripping apart the heads that were being transferred to the processing plant, which was so wild to read, but also again genuinely sad how like the workers of the processing plant were describing the scavengers as like savages, as animals, like as if they're not all eating human flesh, but because the scavengers can't afford it on their own and they're like scavenging, like for some reason that makes them less than literally everyone else who is also enjoying a good human chicken nugget, a human nugget, if you will. And then there's Augustina also like explores a lot of like the classism within this book, which is a lot, so I don't know if I'm going to get into it now because I don't have the notes for it. So off the top of my head, Marcos's father is in the most expensive nursing home in the country, and the reason why it's one of the most expensive nursing homes is because it guarantees 24/7 security surveillance, because it is known that scavengers will also go into nursing homes and try and take elderly people because, again, they are seen as expendable. Their meat isn't as great because they've been alive for a bit, but they're also seen as expendable. So it's just like an easy way to get meat unless you have 24/7 security surveillance, which obviously isn't a choice for the majority. Marcos is truly one of the 1% in this story. And speaking of the 1%, everything just flows together today. Perfect. I will say, as disturbing as this book is, there is one element where they say that celebrities who have fell out of favor of the public eye will be hunted for sport. And I think, I'm so sorry, I think that is the funniest detail Augustina could have ever put into the story. Like, a lot of this book is horrifying, but the idea that like someone says something shitty on Twitter and they get canceled and then they lose all of their like movie revenue and they have no choice but to be hunted by sport, or hunted as sport, as Chris Pratt. No, I can't say that. Despite Marcos's inner turmoil but of this whole new world, this new society, he continues to go to work, which you might ask why. I asked it surely for at least a page until I remembered that capitalism existed. But he basically explains how he's the best at what he does, he gets paid accordingly, and as I mentioned earlier, his father, who is suffering with dementia, is in the most expensive nursing home in the country, and so he needs to continue doing this work so that he can take care of his father and his family, specifically his father though. And just like this idea of like having to put your morals aside because obligations take first priority is an ongoing theme in this book and also an ongoing theme in society in real life, because capitalism has a chokehold on everyone, unfortunately. I don't know when it's gonna get better. I hope it gets better soon because I can't keep living like this. It's this obligation to play a game that you want nothing to do with, but knowing that if you don't play the game, you're gonna die. And in this case, you're gonna die and probably get eaten. So it's just like this endless like reluctance on Marcos's part and on a lot of his colleagues' parts, especially one of his colleagues who's like a butcher. Like that's her entire life, you know, like what else can she do? The product changed, but she does the same work. It's messed up to think about. Listen, don't think that I'm an evil person for sympathizing with a butcher in a human flesh industry. It's hard out here, and I can sympathize with that, at least. At the very least. We're like 20 minutes into this video. I know what you're thinking. I was thinking it for the first like 10 pages of this book, and then again like 100 pages in. Why not just become vegans? Get some tofu. Eat some vitamins. Everyone just become a vegan. The answer is right there. It's so simple. So many people already do it. Why not? And the answer, as I have been hinting at, it's because of capitalism, baby. Capitalism also exists in this world. And if there's anything more important to a government, it's making a profit. That's the only thing that matters. I also would like to emphasize the fact that this book takes place in Argentina, where they have a huge cattle industry, and the cattle industry makes up a huge part of their exports. And also that in not just in Argentina, but in a lot of Latin American countries, like exports make up a huge part of the economy. Like makes up almost the entire part of the economy, and if it's not exports, it's probably like travel, tourism. That's it, tourism. And I feel like Augustina doesn't go into it in this book because this book was originally written in Spanish for Argentine readers. I don't know the word. I'm not going to Google it. So like obviously it doesn't have to be said for people who live in that industry, in that world, in that country, in that economy, you know. But I feel like it may not be as apparent to non-Argentinian readers, specifically like US readers. I see you. I see your reviews. Obviously, the answer is so easy, but when your entire country's economy is based on cattle exports, like you're losing your whole economy if suddenly cows are poisonous to humans. It's just something to think about. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying this book is right in what it chooses to do. I'm saying it's something to think about. This part of the book was also extremely disturbing because cattle industry went down, and the first thing that meat industries did was lobby to make the consumption of human flesh legal. I'm not saying it's right. Once they lobbied and once it became legal, they rebranded human flesh as special meat, which again goes back to the importance of word choice, the importance of language and changing language to suit your needs as a ruling part of society. And they would have commercials of like conservatively dressed happy families having dinner together, family dinner, and eating the special meat and being like, it's just like the old days, you know, stuff like that. So like propaganda is also a huge thing in capitalism. One of the most insidious parts of this whole theme is the fact that special meat was originally, until like organic stuff was popular again, but was originally genetically modified to make it more tender and tasty and addictive, which I think is the worst part, to make it addictive. Because it's one thing to lobby and make cannibalism legal, and it's a whole other thing to make people dependent on that special meat to ensure your profit as a meat producing industry. That's messed up. But it's all about making money, which is the point of this book. It's about capitalism being evil. On top of that, once cannibalism was legalized in this book, researchers, professionals, I want to say also influencers, but I don't remember if Augustina took it that far. But suddenly we're saying like plant protein wasn't enough, tofu wasn't good enough, vitamins weren't good enough. You needed animal protein to survive, to get the necessary nutrients. This aligns with like a company producing too much of a product and then having to convince people that they need this product so that they, again, can ensure a profit. Don't quote me on this, but I think a similar thing was done in the US regarding like dairy products and milk, because I don't think you actually, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm lactose intolerant and I don't drink milk and I've never broken a bone in my body. I'm part of that never broke a bone Reddit thread. I'm actually a moderator there. No, I'm not. I'm pretty sure the same thing was done with dairy milk. There was a huge production of dairy milk and there was an excess of product, and so then the US government was like doing this whole like propaganda thing and like, oh, you need calcium for healthy bones and the only way you can do that is by drinking milk, and then like milk became like a staple in every school lunch cafeteria. Oh, you know what? I don't think Augustina touched on this, but this is something that I thought of on my own. On top of like researchers and professionals saying that like, oh, you need animal protein to survive, I wouldn't, again, this is a fictional world, but like basing it off of like real life things, I wouldn't put it past industries to start like pricing up vitamins and to start like pricing up tofu to make it harder to get those vitamins, so that you actually need to get human meat to get those nutrients, because finding vitamins at a store is like now impossible. Again, that's not a part of the story. That's just like my headcanon, because it just fits, you know, it makes sense if that were the case. Augustina, if you're planning to write a sequel, I got you. So, on top of all these horrific little details, one of the things that most disturbed me is, I think I mentioned it a little bit in the beginning of this video, is how much this paralleled with our society. especially our society today, 2 years into an ongoing pandemic that seems like it's never gonna end. So I have a little list of parallels here because I want everyone to suffer with me. So the first is just like the title of the transition reminded me so much of the new normal, which is like, I guess, what this era of never-ending pandemic and 57 variants is. It's just the new normal. Who cares? It's the new normal. There's nothing we can do about it. This private comfort versus public safety issue that's like obviously apparent in our society, but also apparent in this book, because in our society it's like, just wear a mask, it's not hard. But people want to prioritize their personal comfort, which is not wearing a mask, over the public safety of a larger society and literally everyone around them, which is wear masks, stop breathing on people. And then maybe we wouldn't have 57 variants that we're dealing with on a weekly basis. In the context of the book, it's the personal comfort of wanting to eat meat versus the public safety, public well-being transition of just all becoming vegans. Obviously there's more to that because, as I mentioned, Argentina's like main industry is cattle. So that's like a whole other layer that I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying you got to think about it. I also think that the media in this book, the media's response of saying like, oh, poverty is declining, everything is fine now, see, this is okay, really mirrored to an extent our media, our news's spin on being like, oh, this is the new normal. If there are variants, it's only the fault of people who are unvaccinated. We don't have to wear masks. It's done. It's over. It's whatever. And just kind of like dismissing this whole population who are at risk, you know, like in this book, the people who are at risk or who were at risk were the poor people who were being taken to be consumed. In society, the people in our society, the people who are at risk are the unvaccinated people. I'm not saying that you shouldn't be vaccinated. You definitely for sure should. But I am saying it's wrong to look down on a group of people just because they aren't vaccinated. And to like dismiss them and to be like, oh, well, if they get sick, that's their fault. It's like, no, it's your fault because you should have been taking care of your country, your people from day one. And instead, all you did was give us 3 measly stimulus checks and 4 tests per household, regardless of the size of the family in said household. But no, it's the people who aren't getting vaccinated who's at fault here, not the people who actually have the power to make a difference. Whatever, we're talking about books on this channel, not politics. So overall, I really like this book. I thought it was really smart in what it was trying to do. Hopefully I articulated that well enough and you think that not only am I smart, but that this book is very smart. It was grotesque in a lot of ways. In the more obvious ways, it was very grotesque. In the more subtle, visceral, subversive? I don't know the word I'm looking for. In a lot of ways, it was grotesque, is my point. The most grotesque thing is that I wasn't even that surprised. You know, like, the protagonist explaining how this new society was and why it came and how it came to be. It was kind of just like, yeah, I can see that happening. And I feel like that's the most disturbing element of this book. And in ways, the most genius. Every time I learned something new about this world, I had this feeling of just like, please no, like, don't explain it. I don't want to know. Like, I just want to look away, but I can't look away. And I realized while I was reading it that that's kind of the point, you know. A lot of the people in this book, in the society of this book, like they change the language on purpose so they don't have to confront what they're actually doing, you know. They're intentionally like living in ignorance or in denial or in delusion, whatever word you want to use. And this book, the narrator at least, like forces you to confront this world as it is in a way that a lot of the characters don't want to confront it, which I thought was really neat as a literary tool. What else to say? I mean, I hated every second of it. I gave it 4 stars. I'm telling you about this book because if you can stomach it, I would love for you to pick it up. I am very much a person who, whenever I read something fucked up, I'm like, Now I gotta tell everyone I know about it because I want everyone to get as fucked up as I did. So that's what I'm doing here. That's the purpose of this video. Every page of this book is somehow worse than the last one. Every single time I was like, it can't get worse than this, and then it does. And I think that's so amazing and beautiful of Augustina. And what is truly worse than cannibalism and the power of capitalism, the hold of capitalism that it has on a society, is truly the fact that all lonely men are the same. I'm not going to give you any spoilers, but I gave you a summary of what the book is, and you can just assume what I mean by every lonely man in the world is the same. I hated that part of the book so much. And somehow it disturbed me way more than the cannibalism, way more than the explanation and depiction of the factory and its process. No, it was the lonely man in his barn. That shit disgusted me. Marcos, you had me in the first half. I liked you in the first half, not gonna lie. Second half, thank you so much for watching this hour-long ramble. I don't know how long this is gonna be. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have picked up this book, let me know what you thought. I'd love to discuss because I think this is a very smart, intellectual, layered, onion-ass book about capitalism and the need to survive and the power of language and all that good stuff. And by good, I mean dangerous tools to a ruling class. And yeah, that's it. Again, hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you have a great day. Hopefully this book doesn't ruin food for you forever. Surprisingly, this is messed up. It didn't for me. If anything, it made me more thankful that animal meat existed.